Okay, I don't know why you said pray. Why do you guys say things so weird? Okay, he has to make a 15-minute video. Okay, basically explaining why I'm the greatest human to ever walk the earth. That's pretty much it.
Oh hell no.
Look, yeah. So, Archie, do you want me to
Excuse
present
me,
the
I'll be
argument?
back. No, I don't actually. I'll be back.
Wait,
I can't hear what you're saying.
what does Rizzhan win if he beats you or
I
something?
get his seat. I get the 7th seat.
Basically,
Damn.
Sakamoto. I mean, not Sakamoto. Sakazuki got this shit set up like that Shokugeki shit. So you got to sacrifice to
Yeah.
beat the elites, quote unquote. Like you got to sacrifice.
Isn't this
some
like the
shit.
reference of like Food Wars or something? I'm confused.
Yeah.
Okay.
You got to sacrifice to get a chance or some shit.
I don't know where Archie went, but look,
I'm gonna
I won't be able
sacrifice
to like.
Rizzhan if I win.
I don't think I'll be able to copy and paste the argument, so I'll just have to like say it verbally. My Wi-Fi is terrible.
Yeah, I said that I was gonna be back, and I didn't want you to give it, but now I am back, so I do want you to give it now. Good.
Alright, yeah. So, before we actually get into the argument, we just need to get some semantics clear. So, would you agree that when we talk about contingent things, we're invoking some modality there, right? So when we say X is contingent, we're just saying X fails to exist, or there are some worlds where X fails to exist.
Yeah, sure. There are some worlds to where X wouldn't exist.
Okay, yeah. So you agree that when we just talk about contingent, it's just talking about the ability
Things
of
that are
objects to
possible.
fail to exist or to not fail to exist.
I think my previous answer already explains that. What's your
What
next
did you
question?
say?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. So you just agree to the definition of contingent that I gave. Yeah. So
Okay, cool.
I don't really have a next question because if we just have that established, I can just go
Okay,
into
so
the
since you
argument.
have no next question,
the first premise
cool,
of the argument. Yeah, so I'm just going to give the argument. So the first premise of the argument is just possibly all contingent facts have an explanation.
Can you just send the argument? I think I'll just take it from there.
I can't because my Wi-Fi is quite bad, so it just wouldn't
Can you
let me
just type
copy
it?
and paste. It's going to take me a while.
All right, just say it.
I'm
Go
not on
ahead.
PC.
So what was your first premise?
Yeah, so premise one. Do you want me to like give it premise by premise, or do you want me to like to give?
So I just asked, what was your first premise, just to be clear?
Yeah, okay. So the first premise again, to the second time. It's just possibly all contingent facts have an explanation. Is this guy here? Is it me or am I lagging out?
No, you're not. Sorry, I'm texting someone. Okay. So what did you say? Something all contingent
so the
facts have an
first
explanation?
premise. Yeah, possibly all contingent facts have an explanation.
Okay. So are you just referring to facts that could have been otherwise?
Yeah, that's what I mean by a contingent fact.
So do you think that there is some world to where a contingent fact could have been?
Yeah, that's what a contingent fact means.
Okay, cool, amazing. Now, do you think there is some world to where a contingent fact, like, had to have been?
Okay, let me just understand your question. So are you just asking me?
Do you think there's a
Do I think there are
contingent
any
world
worlds?
where it couldn't have failed to exist? This contingent fact. So this contingent fact
Look, I
couldn't
don't
have
know what
failed
you
to be
mean by
true.
that question. I think
my
look, when I
question's
talk
pretty
about
clear.
things, I actually don't understand it. If you could clarify.
Okay. Well, yeah, of course I could clarify. Do you think that there is a world where a contingent fact, just a fact that could have been otherwise, that is not a necessary truth, has to be a necessary truth? Or do you think in every
I don't
world
believe
a
that
contingent
any contingent
fact?
facts. I think look. I hold
Okay,
to the axioms S5. So I don't think that any contingent facts are necessary. I think
so
that
then I'm a bit
obviously I
confused on
think
your
you're
term by
familiar with
this question
S5.
then. Okay, cool. I'm glad we have that down. I'm glad that you're sane, right? But then I'm a bit confused by your initial question, because when you say possibly all contingent facts have an explanation, I consider possibly to refer to something that could be true in some possible world, but not necessarily what is actually true.
Yeah, so I'm just if you want me to explain that, I can. So all I'm saying here is just that look, things being explained isn't extra property of things, right? So all my argument needs to hinge on is just the fact that look, if there is a world where all contingent facts have an explanation, then in that world there's a necessary being. And if possibly there is a necessary being, then necessarily there is a necessary being via S5, right? So I'm not positing that contingent
This
facts
doesn't
need to
answer
have
my
an explanation
question.
in all possible worlds. Yeah, I think I am answering your question. Maybe I'm just
That's okay.
unclear on the question.
I
But
think
look,
you
I've
are
asked you to
unclear.
clarify the
Can you
question
repeat what
twice,
my question
and that's
is?
why I've gone from it.
Excuse me. Can you
What
repeat
did you
what my
say?
question was? Because you never actually asked me to clarify the question I'm referring to.
Yeah,
I
your
asked multiple
question
questions.
specifically would just look. Do I believe that contingent facts can
That's not the
exist
question I'm
necessarily in
referring
some
to.
world? Okay, so what is the question? I'm confused.
No, I can tell you're confused. Don't worry. We'll put you on board. We'll tame you. So obviously, the question I asked is, what does possibly mean in such a phrase? If possibly, which is a modal term, just
Yes,
refers to something that
when I
could be
refer to
true
something being
in some possible
possible,
world. Excuse me, I'm not done
yes.
speaking. So
Okay,
I'm
that's
gonna
fine.
put a muzzle on the dog for a second. I think that's what he likes to say. But I'm just referring to something, at least what I think of possibly. It just refers to something that could be true in some possible world. So when you ask, or when you say that if I think that possibly all contingent facts have an explanation, this doesn't make sense to me, right? Because all contingent facts having an explanation, all contingent facts at least accounting for some way of being. This, what do you think that entails within a contingent fact? Do you not think that some
Look,
part of that's
okay,
trivial?
so let me just get more clarification question. So what are you
Are you
specifically
trying to
asking me?
ask? Excuse me. I want to interrogate your motivation here. Do you think? Are you asking me essentially that if I think that there is some contingent fact that can't be explained, if there can be contingent things that don't have explanations, is that what you're saying?
Okay, no, so I
Okay,
believe,
clarify
look,
that.
yeah, so what I'm asking you is simply just look, I believe there is absolutely no contradiction with contingent facts in some worlds not having an explanation. But I don't believe that there are any worlds in which a
Can you
contingent
repeat
fact is
that?
necessarily unexplained. So
Because
wait,
that
what do you
doesn't seem
say?
like a question to me.
Wait,
You just said this. You
what do
just
you
said this
mean?
is
I
what I'm
don't know what you
asking, and
mean.
then explained your view. That doesn't seem like a question to me. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I was gonna it's kind of like a linguistic thing. Like I was gonna lead on to
I
this.
don't think that's linguistic. I just think you blundered. But if it's okay, I
Look,
want you to
it's not
repeat that.
it's not blunt.
You don't have to address the irrelevant things. I just wanted to get into this argument. Could you just address what I'm saying and
Look,
engage?
okay. Yeah, I don't. If it was irrelevant, I don't know why you brought it up. But look, we can look. So
Only an
all I
autist
mean
would say
here is
something
just
like that.
wait. All I mean here is just look. There are contingent facts that possibly have an explanation, but I don't think there are any contingent facts which are necessarily unexplained. That is, I don't think that if there is a contingent fact, and in all worlds where the contingent fact exists, it lacks an explanation.
Okay, so why is that?
Yeah, so look, we can just go back to our definition, right? So the
Sure.
definition of a contingent thing that we established was just it exists in some worlds and it doesn't exist in other worlds, right?
Correct.
And look, to make the claim that there is a contingent fact that is necessarily unexplained would to be make an intrinsic claim about that fact, because when you ascribe an attribute of necessity to something, that means you're saying that it essentially has the attribute. So that means that there must be some kind of contradiction with a being like a contingent being necessary
Where's the
unexplained,
contradiction?
and the definition. Wait, what did you say?
Where's the contradiction? Why can't it be the fact
Yeah,
that
because you're
that
positing.
it is essential
Look,
in such a
we already
way?
established. Yeah, we already established that the essence of a contingent being is just that it exists in some worlds and it doesn't in others.
So when we get into necessity, do you not think a necessity can be ascribed in different contexts or apertures?
Look, I never said that contingent facts are necessary. I never said that they have to
That's
claim
not what
that.
I'm asking.
I'm saying that they'd have to claim that contingent facts necessarily are not explained.
That doesn't answer my question and that actually fails to engage with my question. So I'll repeat my
It
question
does
just in
answer
case you
that.
didn't hear. So I'm asking you, do you think necessity can be applied in different contexts and apertures?
Look, obviously necessity can be applied in different contexts. That's not relevant to what I'm saying.
I think it is, because if you're saying that it's contradictory, they would have to be applying to the same aperture to be contravening with the exact same rule set. But if they're within different apertures, I question why they would come to any conflict. We see examples of this all the
No,
time in
because
different rule books and framework sets.
look, yeah. So I just don't think you're understanding what I'm saying. Because what I'm basically saying is that if a person is claiming that a contingent fact is necessarily unexplained, then that would mean that they'd have to say that a contingent fact being explained would be actually contradictory with the definition of the contingent fact. But it seems that there is
It
actually
would
no
only be
contradiction with the
contradictory
definition of the
depending
contingent fact.
on, excuse me. I agree that this would be the case if they're looking, depending on the frame of reference. But we don't seem to have an established frame of reference when we're referring to something that can
I don't know what you mean by
necessarily be
frame of
unexplained. By frame of reference, I just mean the context or the aperture that we're looking at. Because obviously, when we refer to different
Look,
definitions,
obviously in
and we
that
refer to,
context,
excuse
you're
me, I
gonna
wasn't
have
done
to
answering your
positive
question.
contradiction.
I wasn't done answering your question. I'd like you to please be muted. Thank you so much. Back to what I was saying, though, right? When I refer to this, right, when we use language, when we look at different, or when we try to establish different conclusions, obviously we have to have some direction to go to get to these conclusions, right? And this is going to depend on your frame of reference or aperture. It's going to depend on the lens you're looking at. Obviously, when we refer to necessity within this context, if we're just referring, you mentioned that this was an intrinsic claim we're making. This is something that's integral to the world. Are we referring to integral to the actual statement, or referring to the semantics, or referring to that this is integral to the actual world in the example that we're looking at? Because if it is essential of this world that we're looking at, I don't see the issue. But if you're referring to conflicting with the actual sentence, that's completely fine, and I actually have another question to engage with, right?
Derivative modality.
Okay, so what I'm saying that they'd have to be making the intrinsic fact about claim about is the contingent fact, because to say that a contingent fact is not explained in any world is just the same as saying that there is a contradiction with a contingent fact being
I
explained.
don't think that's the
They do
same
not
statement you
think.
said.
Wait. They do not think that a contingent fact has an explanation. They don't think it's possible for that contingent fact
You're
to
wasting
have an
your
explanation.
breath, though, because that's not
Meaning
the,
that they have,
that's not the
meaning that they think
proposition
that
I'm
there is a
engaging with.
contradiction.
Wait, Rizzhan, you're
Obviously, I've
wasting
already
your
given the
breath.
framework.
Rizzhan, you're wasting your breath.
I don't know
That's
what
not what I'm
framework you're
talking about.
confused about.
I know you're confused because that's not what I'm talking about, right? You're wasting your breath.
No, I
I'm
said
trying to
I don't
help
know
you.
what you're confused about.
Excuse me. I'm trying to help you. So the thing is, right, when we were referring to the statement, you didn't say in any world. You were referring to
That's what
one
I
local
said.
world. Excuse me. Please don't interrupt. I know that you're like autistic and you have these impulses to where you just want to randomly speak, but you need to control that and be medicated immediately.
That's literally what I said.
Excuse me. Someone please mute this guy. Thank you. Now, obviously, what I was talking about and what I was referring to, Rizzhan, is one localized world. If you're referring to all worlds, I don't think that's the same thing as saying possible. You wouldn't be referring to something that's contingent then. If you're referring to something that's evident of all worlds, that sentence fails to make sense. Right? Now I understand your confusion. You blundered earlier. You said one world. Now, if it is the case that you're referring to all possible worlds, right? Obviously, I don't think that makes sense. And I actually have another question for you. That kind of goes back to your initial question. Do you think that it's the case that, possibly some contingent facts fail to have an explanation?
Okay, so look, wait, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna respond. I'm just gonna answer the question after I respond to what you said. So no, firstly, I did not make a blunder.
We agree.
Because when I was talking, when I was talking about a or one possible world in that context, I was either talking about S5, right? So I was either talking about the inference from, for example, as I was saying, again, what I'm simply just saying is that there is at least one world where all contingent facts have an explanation, right? And if it's the case that there is at least one world where all contingent facts have an explanation, that just implies the existence of a necessary being in that world. And I'm using the S5 inference there to establish that if X is necessary in one world, then X is necessary in all worlds. That's literally the S5 axiom. So I'm not blundering, because the S5 axiom is making an inference from the necessity of a being.
All you're saying is that we agree, right?
Wait, let me finish. Wait, I'll let you finish. So don't interrupt.
Because you're saying nothing that's relevant.
Wait,
it doesn't matter.
let me finish. It's saying that
you're saying something trivial or something. This doesn't matter.
That the necessity. Wait, let me finish.
Do you want to say this guy's blue next?
Wait, are you gonna let me finish?
Well, I'm just confused on the motivation behind this.
The motivation for what?
What you're saying? What's the intention here? We both agree this is just a mix-up. I misunderstood your initial point.
Well, no, but you said you're the one who said I made a blunder.
Excuse me here. Let me just be clear for the recording. Right now, you're saying because I perceived you messing up, as in you just misspoke. You're having an entire rant about the fact that I thought you misspoke. Am I clear here?
Wait, you do understand that blundering is different from misspeaking?
You do understand here that we're referring to my semantics, correct? Excuse me, you do understand we're referring to my semantics here, correct? Whose semantics are we referring to? Whose semantics are we referring to?
We're referring to the colloquial semantics.
Of who? Answer the question and engage. Don't run away. Stunlocked? I'll answer for you. We're referring to mine, Rizzhan. So obviously, when you say this, okay, obviously, but I think blunder means something different. All I perceive that to mean is that you use blunder differently than how I do. And that, I don't care about that. That has nothing to do with the debate. Can we engage? Thank you. Now, please answer my question, right? Back to the debate. You asked me previously if possibly all contingent facts have an explanation. I think we've gone past that. Now I want to ask you, do you think possibly that there are some contingent facts that fail to have an explanation? More clearly, I'm asking you, do you think that there are some contingent things that can fail to exist but just can't be explained? I hope that's clear.
Rizzhan? Wait, Rizzhan, are you there?
Are you muted? If you're
No,
muted or on push to talk, I'll clarify for you.
Oh, his Wi-Fi is cutting out.
Okay.
Yeah, he's not here. Yeah, what's good, Archie?
What's up, free?
How you doing, man?
Doing great. How are you?
So Archie.
Yeah, I'm good, but I haven't been here in so long, bro.
Wait, free. I didn't even get to respond to the question, so I'm just gonna respond to the question, answer the question, and let you go on. So to answer the question, if all you're asking me just look, is it possible for something to necessarily not have an explanation? No, because again, S5.
That's not what I'm asking you.
Okay, so then what are you asking me then?
I'll clarify for about the fourth time, and I think that'll be my final time before I disengage from this, because I don't think you're entirely listening. The idea is, right, I'm asking you if there can be contingent things that don't have an explanation, right? Could there possibly be,
I already told you that
I haven't fully,
I just told you that I think that contingent things don't.
Thank you. I don't know why it's so hard for you to be cordial. You didn't even hear my entire question. Do you think that possibly there are some contingent facts that don't have an explanation? I understand you think that, or I understand we established that they can fail.
Yes, I just
told you
you've
already clarified. Excuse me, Rizzhan, are you unmuting yourself?
I already answered.
This is just so disingenuous. Please be quiet and let me finish. It's not that hard to have respect for your mutual debater. Now back to what I'm saying though. Even though there can be some things that can fail, do you think that there can be a lack of explanation? Even if we're referring outside of epistemic access.
Okay, yeah. So to answer the question that I've answered about 10 times within the span of this conversation, yes, I do think that some contingent things don't have an explanation, but I do not think that contingent things necessarily do not have an explanation. Meaning, I think that there are worlds where contingent things have an explanation, and there are worlds where contingent things do not have an explanation.
Okay, cool. I think that clarifies it. That's fine. So, what's your next premise?
Wait, so do you agree with premise one?
Which is again? Sorry.
Possibly all contingent things have an explanation.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, you agree with it. Yeah. So we can move on to premise two. So premise one is
well, what do you mean by explanation? I guess I'll ask.
Yeah. So when I refer to explanation, I'm just referring to.
Also, I should ask you, what do you? Causal reason. That's cool. Also, by the way, I should ask you, what do you define as God? I guess I forgot to ask you that initially.
Yeah, I define God as like a necessary concrete entity. If you want me to define any other terms.
Gotcha. That's fine. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So the second premise is that if all contingent facts were to be explained, they could not be explained by a contingent thing.
I disagree. So why? That's where we get juicy. So why is that?
Yeah, so the reason why that is just just a causal problem, right? So if you were to say that a contingent thing explains all contingent facts, that means you're also saying that a contingent thing explains itself, because you're saying that a contingent thing is
why can't there be
itself
oscillating contingent things explaining things furthermore?
What did you say?
Why can't there be like oscillating contingent things explaining furthermore things? almost in a linear
That doesn't
progression or
explain why
randomized
the set
progression.
itself exists. That doesn't explain that.
What's
That
the
might
issue with
explain
it?
why.
What's the issue with an infinitely
Wait. Archie, I'm gonna answer your question. I'm gonna answer your
Okay.
question. So
Cool.
I just said that there'd be an explanatory gap here because might explain why at each point there are individual contingent things that exist, but it wouldn't actually explain why the collection, the mereological composite of contingent things exist.
What are you talking about? They'd be infinitely explaining themselves.
Wait. No,
Yes,
you're not
does
understanding
answer
what I'm
your
saying.
question.
So
Yes,
imagine
your issue. Excuse me. We're not waiting. We're not waiting. No. You're not a child. You know not to interrupt. We're not going to baby you, right? Be quiet. Now back to what I'm saying, though, right? Obviously, I understand your issue, but this issue only runs if we assume there has to be a beginning. What's the issue with there being an infinite amount of explanations, constantly explaining? What's the need for just one entity, one necessary entity that has to explain it all?
Look, okay, so to respond to it, and it's going to be quite an extensive response because like there's a lot of philosophical like things to pack here, but to unpack here, sorry. But look, imagine that you just have like a bubble, right? And in the bubble, there are bubbles, and each time a bubble pops, another bubble comes into existence. Each time another bubble pops, another bubble comes into existence. Now that might explain why some of the parts of like the entire bubble exist, but it doesn't actually explain the existence of the bubble that keeps these other bubbles safe. Another example might be a house, right? So imagine inside of a house you have a dog, which then gives birth to another dog, which then gives birth to another dog, etc., etc. That might explain why all the dogs within the house or all the things within the house exist, but it doesn't actually explain why the house exists, which is then analogous to the claim that I'm making. So it might be the case that we have some infinite chain of contingent things that wait. It might explain why we have an infinite chain of contingent things that explain each other, but it doesn't actually explain why the mereological composite or why the collection of those contingent things exist. And also,
Okay, so
I just don't
you're
want
assuming.
I don't want to be
Yeah.
I wasn't in. Yeah, I wasn't finished.
You're going to yap about
sorry,
not wanting to be interrupted, and I'm going to tell you I don't care.
I'm sorry,
Listen, the idea is, right?
I'm sorry, I
The
wasn't
analogy
No,
doesn't
Archie,
really
don't
make
do him
sense
like that,
because
bro.
even if there's a free,
I'm
what?
sorry, I wasn't.
Okay, I don't want to be mean, but please be quiet. We're just
I'm
going to be
sorry,
here.
I wasn't.
And back to what I was saying. The larger bubble, does it not assume that there's some exterior existence?
I'm sorry, I wasn't finished.
It's okay, I forgive you. Now, does this larger bubble not assume there's an exterior existence? Yes or no?
The larger bubble is just the collection of all contingent things.
Yeah. And I'm saying that that's the issue. Like, you understand the larger bubble will be consistently being created over and over again, right? Unless you're assuming that they share some identity in some sense.
The things within the composite of the bubble might be explained, but it doesn't actually explain the composite of the bubble itself. Which is why I'm saying
exactly.
Again,
you're saying this assumes that it has to have an explanation. There's an issue with this. I'm saying this isn't a response.
Interrupting like multiple times. Which is why I'm saying again that within the mereological composite, we might find that the parts might explain each other, but it doesn't actually explain the existence of the mereological composite itself.
Okay. Do you understand the term mereological composite? Do you understand what this presumes, right?
Yes, I know what a mereological composite is.
Explain this to me.
A mereological composite is a whole, so that whole is composed of multiple parts.
Okay. So do you understand that there can be some alternate interpretation to where there is an infinite amount of explanations and these things don't have to be like composite in such a sense? Like, do you think that it is necessary? Do you think it's trivial that there are mereological composites? Or that at least that's how we describe the model of the universe, or the model of multiple universes, or really all of existence?
Look, again, like, I'm just gonna give like a quick response, and I just like don't want to be interested. I'm also gonna answer the question, so like don't be afraid that I'm not gonna answer the question. But look, so firstly, again, like in the infinite chain of things, I'm not saying that the things within the chain have to be composed. I'm saying that obviously it's going to be trivially true that the things within the chain form a composite, because when we talk about a collection, all we mean by a collection there is just a composite. And so if you're talking about an infinite amount of objects, then you're talking about the collection of those objects, which again forms a composite. Now, if you're simply just asking me why mereological,
I responded to this.
If you're asking me why mereological realism is true, if you're asking me why methodological realism is true, or why there are such things that they're actually composed, I can give you argument for that.
I'm not asking that. Like, you seriously need a new set of ears.
Wait,
All we're saying is
no,
this.
you asked me
Excuse
if
me,
it's trivially
why
true
are
that things
you
are composed.
speaking? Be quiet. That's a different question from what you just said, moron. I'm glad you agree. Now back to what I'm saying, though. Right? Obviously, we understand the idea that, in this example, this almost assumes that existence would take almost like and obviously I know this is just an analogy, like you're not saying it's literally a bubble, but I feel like it's disanalogous because the way we would interpret creation of existences on such a level, right? A way to look at it, a constantly oscillating chain of existences, there is no outside of those existences. I feel like the bubble assumes that there is some, because you said there's a bubble and there's just one large bubble and then there's a bunch of bubbles inside of it. That's not the form or model. Excuse me. No, I don't think. What I don't think is that you need to speak. Now back to what I'm saying, right? Obviously, we understand in this instance, this assumes that the model of the universe would take some kind of.
You did that to me,
bro. Unironically, you need to shut up. I did that to you because what you were saying didn't respond to what I'm saying. What I'm saying, you don't even know what I'm saying. That's why I'm explaining. Why did you just deafen yourself? Fucking retard. Okay. Anyways, back to what I'm saying though, right? We understand in the sense that this bubble, it would almost take some form, like as if there would be some exterior existence, or as if this bubble is the exterior existence that contains a chain of existences. That's not the model of infinite regression. The model of infinite regression doesn't have any sense of existence that is different, or at least it doesn't have to, right? That is a commitment that it has to take. The only commitment that it has to take is that they all share the trait of constant creation, that there is a span of existences constantly being created and creating and created. This bubble almost assumes some kind of finite model or some limited model, or the way we would look at infinite regression. I think it's limiting its power, and I think it's misinterpreting what an infinite regression is. Same with your other analogy.
Okay.
That's why I think there's an issue.
Okay. So, to respond to all you were saying, so the first thing I just want to respond to is just look. Well, the first thing I just want to ask actually, just look. If you think that we have a chain, right, and we have a chain of these things, of these infinite explanations, do you believe that the chain itself is distinct from its parts, right? So do you believe that the parts of the chain, which would be the individual contingent things, form together to actually form the chain, which would be the meological composite?
To answer your question, I want to clarify that this is just an alternative that I'm bringing up. And I want to say, I do think that the product of all of these parts are distinct from the parts of it in itself. I think that the way we describe the product is different from the way we describe the parts. I think that the product is just a description of all those parts if they were put together. So when you describe a set, it almost assumes that these are put together in such a way, which I find a little weird, at least in the terminology we're using. If you're just describing it in like a model sense, to where we're just modeling an infinite regression and we're looking kind of inside the model, I think that we can describe it as a set. But I think it'd be a little inaccurate to the nature of an infinite regression to describe it as such.
Well, look, okay, so after I finish what I'm saying, I'll just like ask you another question. But look, obviously it's going to be the case that the infinite regression is a set, because guess what? The infinite regression only contains contingent objects. And you do understand that we can just speak of a class of all contingent objects. And if we speak of a class or a collection of all contingent objects, that will just be identical as us to saying, oh, these infinite contingent objects, like an infinite amount of contingent objects exists, or the infinite regression of the infinite amount of contingent objects exists. It would literally just be the same thing. So look, the class of all objects is literally just the same thing as the infinite regression of those contingent objects, because the only things in the infinite regression are contingent objects, meaning that we wouldn't actually be mistaken to call an infinite regression of contingent objects a set, because obviously, like, you can speak of classes as sets, you can speak as categories.
I don't think that's an argument. I already understand your conclusion. I don't think that explains it.
I was just clarifying. I will just clarify.
You don't need to clarify your position. I want an argument.
I think there was a bit of confusion in what you said, but can you
Your
please
thought
not
is
interrupt?
wrong. I want
Now,
an
can you
argument.
please not interrupt me? Can you please
Well, I
not
just want an argument.
I
That's
just
why
want to ask
I'm
you a
interrupting, because this is irrelevant.
No, I just want to ask you a question. If
Sure.
you think that there is an asymmetrical relationship between the infinite regress and like its parts, this just ties back into what I'm saying, because what I'm saying is simply just that if we have the class of all contingent objects and we have the contingent objects within the class, the class itself is a contingent object. Hence why I'm saying that the class itself is just a mereological composite. Now, if you agree that the infinite regress is a mereological composite such that it's composed of parts and those parts sum together to make a whole, then you'd also be conceding that the infinite regress is a contingent object. Now, this goes back to the earlier point of my argument. The earlier point of my argument was just saying, look, in some possible world, all contingent facts need to have an explanation, meaning that the collection or the composition of the smaller contingent objects needs an explanation, because that collection itself is a contingent object, and I can give the justification for that.
So you didn't actually give an argument. You completely misrepresented what I was saying and completely shadowboxed the entire time. This was pretty disappointing, actually. I think the only interesting thing you mentioned was your claim earlier about possible explanations, to which we can get into. I don't mind. Yeah, I don't think there's anything I really have to say towards that, besides the fact that I clarified. I don't believe that we talk about set, or that it could be described in such a way, in such a class. I think that's inaccurate. You clearly think it's accurate. That's okay. We disagree on that. I've explained why this is an alternative. Your argument holds a commitment for this, or at least your perspective does. Mine doesn't. So this doesn't really matter.
We can just ask Mercury to give judgment.
So that's okay. I obviously asked previously if you could explain your question, or at least what you wanted to question. So you said that you wanted to, or sorry, not a question, my apologies. You said an argument. You wanted to give an argument regarding like your claim about possible explanations.
Yeah, my claim. Yeah, so that was earlier. So the reason why I think that like the principle of, well, are you just asking me? Do I think like
I'm asking you to give an argument.
The argument for the principle of possible explanations?
Sure.
Yeah. So the argument for it, just look. First, we just have to zoom in on what a contingent object is essentially. So what a contingent object is essentially just it fails to exist in some worlds. It fails to exist in some other worlds. It does not fail to exist. Now, if we analyze that and we say, okay, there is a contingent thing, and that contingent thing necessarily does not have an explanation, that would the inverse of that would simply just be saying it's a contradiction for that contingent object to have an explanation. But if we're just saying that it's a contradiction for that contingent object to have an explanation, that would also be meaning that we're saying there's a contradiction with the definition or the essence of the contingent object to have an explanation, and we've already established what the definition is. So that means that that person would be claiming that there is some kind of contradiction, whether logical or metaphysical, with the definition of a contingent object. But it doesn't actually seem that there is a contradiction.
I don't think that argument explains it. We can go to conclusions.
Wait. You didn't let me finish the argument. So,
I think your first premises failed to explain each other, so I don't think the rest of your argument.
Look, if you think my first premise, that's fine. We can just ask Mercury to give judgment because I can't conclude. So.
That's okay. Mind you, your goal was to prove God exists.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, good. What are your thoughts on this, Mr. Mercury?
Bro, where is this guy, bro? This guy's gonna hold me over, man.
Probably thinking. I don't know.
Hello?
Yo, what's up?
Yes, sorry. I thought it was unmuted, but apparently it wasn't. Yeah, I was just gonna ask you guys to give conclusions, to wrap it up in a nice little bow.
Okay. Do you want me to go first, or you, Rizzhan?
Okay. You can go.
Okay. So obviously, initially, he asked me the question of whether possibly all contingent facts have an explanation. And to that, I simply answered him with the fact that obviously I believe that kind of depends on what you mean by possibly. I don't think he answered this question really, because I think when he didn't even mean to say the word possibly. I think he just meant to ask me if I feel that contingent things have an explanation. But so we didn't really get much of that question answered. But later on, I did ask him essentially why, or if he believes that possibly there could be some contingent facts that don't have an explanation. He agreed to this. I said, cool, okay. Now we ended up getting into what leads next. Okay, cool. So if these contingent facts or these objects he likes to describe them as have to have an explanation, what can come from that? He thinks that there could be a necessarily concrete being. I told him, what's the issue, or I asked him what's the issue with infinite regress. He seemed to describe the issue by a lack of explanation for how the regress started, which I think is critically ignorant, and I think that mistakes what a regress or an infinite regress is. I think it and then he tried to give an analogy for how it lacks or fails to explain certain parts of its existence using a large bubble containing other bubbles, which I told him how just structurally this doesn't make sense. Geodesically, this doesn't make sense. And even when we just compare and describe what an infinite regress is compared to this large bubble, this exterior bubble almost assumes there's some exterior existence to this regress or part, which I don't agree with, which ended up getting into what we even consider it a set to be. He clearly thinks for some reason that they share some relationship to where the parts would be equivalent to the product, but I told him I think this is not the case. I think actually rather when we take a look, especially at the model of an infinite regress, that it seems when we take a look at it, the way we're describing it seems to be different than how we measure actual objects within our universe, or how we actually look at models of things that can be held. I don't think there is some outside invisible implication or force that's holding this regress. I think this regress is that exists, and that is simply it. And obviously he disagrees with that, but I think his argument just failed to explain it. I think he just repeated it. So that's my conclusion.
Okay, yeah. So I'll just give my conclusions. So we just firstly started off the dialect. With me just establishing the semantics of what I mean by contingent. He agreed to that, and the definition that we just agreed to, just X is contingent if and only if X fails to exist in some worlds, but does not fail to exist in other worlds. Then we moved on to premise one of the argument. Premise one of the argument was just a statement of the principle of possible explanation. So what the principle of possible explanation states, and it's inspired from Josh Rasmus, it simply just states that possibly all contingent facts have an explanation, right? Now, we went down this rabbit hole of him asking me, what do you think possible means? I just told him, and I don't know why he thinks I didn't answer this, but I simply just told him that what I think we mean when we say that something is possible, it just to mean that it obtains or exists in some world, right? And I don't know why he thinks he didn't answer this. Maybe I didn't. Maybe he didn't hear me. Maybe like I cut out. But I'm pretty sure that I did say this. Now he went on with some other questions, right? Simply just asking me, do I think that it is necessary for a contingent fact to have an explanation? I said no. That's the whole point of my argument, right? If he tracked premise one, and if he had like the basic intellectual ability to understand premise one, he would understand that premise one is simply just making a claim that it's possible that contingent facts have an explanation. So it's not saying that in the actual world or in all worlds contingent facts have an explanation. Simply just saying possibly contingent facts have an explanation. So to me at least, he ended up agreeing to premise one, so he just moved on to premise two. Premise two is like the main point of contention. Premise two, we were simply just asking, look, okay, premise two is simply just the collection of all contingent facts cannot be explained in terms of the contingent thing, right? And he basically asked me, okay, what's the contradiction? Like, well, why do you think that? I basically just told him, look, I think the contradiction is simply that when we say that a contingent fact explains all contingent facts, a contingent fact is also contingent, meaning that a contingent fact will also need to explain itself. But it's obviously contradictory for a contingent fact to explain itself, because for a contingent fact to explain itself, it would have to exist prior to itself. But obviously, nothing can exist prior to itself. Now, he simply just asked, okay, why can't we just have like an infinite regress of explanations? Now, this doesn't actually address or attack anything I'm saying, because I'm not trying to give an explanation of the parts of the composite. I'm trying to give an explanation for the whole composite. him saying, "Oh, why can't we just have an infinite regressive explanations?" only explains the parts of the composite, but that's not what we're trying to explain here. I could grant him, in all honesty, that the objects of the infinite regress just explain themselves. It doesn't actually explain the composite or the whole of the infinite regress itself, which again we're trying to explain, right? And I gave the house and the bubble example. So the house example would just look. We can have a house, and the house can contain dogs, right? And the dogs can keep giving birth to each other, explaining each other. But even though that might explain the dogs, it doesn't actually explain anything else. It doesn't explain the existence of the house. It might explain the existence of the other objects in the house, but it doesn't actually explain the house. And so that's basically what I'm saying here. I'm saying, look, an infinite regress might explain some of the parts of the composite, but it doesn't explain the existence of the composite itself. And what we're trying to strictly explain here is just the existence of the composite. And so, look, if his account doesn't actually give an adequate explanation for the composite or the whole itself, then I don't think his account actually succeeds. Then we moved on to the point about whether like a set is a class, right? So when we speak of we're not whether a set is a class, but whether an infinite regress is a class. I said I think this is trivially true, because if we're going to talk about the infinite regress of all contingent objects, that just simply just means that we're talking about an infinite amount on all composite objects, right? But that's literally just the same thing as talking about the class or set of all contingent objects, because an infinite regress also just includes the entirety of all contingent objects. That's literally what he's saying. So there wouldn't be a distinction between talking about the class of all contingent objects and an infinite regress of all contingent objects, right? And so, under my semantics at least, an infinite regress is just the same thing as a set. There's no relevant distinction between infinite regress and a set here. And then we moved on to the point about him like wanting a justification for the principle of possible explanation. Mind you, he pretty much already agreed that the principle of possible explanation is true. So I don't know why he asked me to justify it again. But my justification basically was, look, to make a claim that a contingent fact necessarily does not have an explanation is the same thing as just to say that it's contradictory that a contingent fact has an explanation. But it doesn't actually seem that there is a contradiction with the definition of a contingent fact and to have an explanation, because we see this all the time, right? We see contingent facts having explanations all the time. Chairs, couches, sofas, the sun has an explanation. So
Hello? Is it just me or did he cut out?
See, I thought
No,
it
he
lagged for
cut
a
up on me
second.
as well.
No, he cut out. I'm not gonna lie, I like spaced out. But
Yeah, but he does talk for too much. That is true.
I can't even lie, bro. Like, Rizzhan was talking for a straight 15 minutes, dog. Like, I played a whole fucking Star Wars match.
Bro,
This
I
guy just
played
kept talking.
2.5 rounds like of this video game, bro. Like,
But
he's already talking about dogs, having other dogs and stuff. I don't know, bro. He seems to like it.
Yeah, bro. And on top of that, bro, I played 5 Clash Royale games, bro. And I played against like 3 2.6 Hog Rider, like log cycle shit, and he's still not done. Like,
yeah.
oh my god.
Do you feel that you've like that what you've gotten from Rizzhan's conclusion already is like satisfied you, or do you need more?
Okay, let's just assume that Rizzhan's done there. So it's a pretty interesting debate. But I'd probably say that Archie won this debate because when Rizzhan was giving his argument, it seems like he was making the wrong type of argument. So he would have won if he was like, if he explicitly said, something like, the existence of an infinite regress of contingent facts doesn't explain why there is such a thing as contingency to begin with, or like something as a contingent type to begin with. I'd be sympathetic to that sort of response, but I'm not sympathetic to like a more like material response, like such as if we have like an infinite regress, and if we grant that each contingent thing in the infinite regress explains itself, then we still need to explain the set or something over and above the each part of the infinite regress. I'm just not sympathetic to that type of thing because it just doesn't seem to get past the refutation there.
Gotcha. Also, what would you say if someone were to ask you
Wait,
That's okay.
I like that.
That's okay. You lost. Back to what my question though. Wait, I was gonna ask.
Wait,
What would you say?
give
Excuse me. After me, he gave it to me. I don't want to meet you though. I'm asking a question. So, what would you respond, Mercury, to someone if they were to ask, "How does this account for why contingent things even exist? Why contingency even exists?"
So I'd probably say that contingency. So why